straight on with this session now. We've got Fashion for Good's Mass Balance Demonstrator project, and to tell you all about it from Fashion for Good, Aidan Collins. Aidan.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone had a nice lunch. Thank you, Leo. My name is Aidan Collins. I'm a senior analyst at Fashion for Good. For those of you that are unaware, Fashion for Good is a global innovation platform based in Amsterdam that brings together brands, manufacturers, investors, and innovators together to collectively adopt and accelerate sustainable solutions across the apparel and textile industry with a specific focus on delivering solutions that can deliver systematic change. We all know that the apparel industry is under increasing, or the apparel industry and many other industries are under increasing pressure to decarbonize, particularly reduce the reliance on fossil-based feedstocks. We know that biosynthetic alternatives exist. Many drop-in biosynthetic polymers exhibit strong technical performance, but despite that progress, adoption remains slow. Why is that? Well, it's not just a material or technical challenge, it's more of a systems challenge. Production capacities are limited, costs remain high, carbon accounting frameworks are inconsistent, and sourcing renewable feedstocks at scale adds another layer of complexity. Hence, this is why Fashion for Good initiated the Mass Balance Demonstrator project. This project was really to design a practical pathway for scaling biomass attributed PET with using the mass balance attribution chain of custody model, leveraging existing infrastructure today. At its core, the project asks an important question: how can we accelerate adoption of lower fossil alternatives today while building the credibility, accounting rigor, and collaboration needed for long-term transformation? In this session, we'll explore the challenges the industry faces, what this consortium has built together, and what needs to happen next to drive wider uptake of bio-attributed materials. If mass balance attribution is new to you, it may be helpful to think about renewable chemicals or sustainable aviation fuels, SAFs. In these systems, renewable and fossil feedstocks enter the same production infrastructure and become chemically indistinguishable in the final output, rather than requiring those inputs to be physically segregated throughout production. Mass balance uses verified accounting to track renewable inputs and then allocate or attribute the corresponding share to outputs. So the goal is not to create an entirely new material, but to provide a practical pathway for progressively replacing fossil inputs using infrastructure that exists today. So today, I'm joined by leaders representing key parts of the value chain, from manufacturing, brand strategy, to consulting and standards development. Claire, Richard, Sophie, Anders, perhaps each of you could introduce yourself briefly.
Thank you, Aidan. Hello, everybody. My name is Claire, and I am the Global Head of Sustainability Program within Indorama Ventures for the fiber segment of that company. For those who don't know Indorama Ventures, it is the global leader in PET and polyester production, with a footprint in recycling, packaging, and also textile value chains. My role within Indorama Venture is to drive the decarbonisation roadmap of the company, to link innovation with market demand, and of course, to support our customer in the transition of decarbonisation, lower footprints, and adoption of bio-based material. Very nice to meet you.
And I'm Anders from Bestseller. Nice to see you all, even though I can't really see you. The light is quite bright, but I'm from Bestseller, a Danish fashion company. We got more than 20 brands in the group. Maybe you know Jack & Jones, Only, Veomoda, Selected, and I'm the materials research lead in the innovation team. So my role is to basically look at everything that can reduce impact within cotton, polyester, and man-made cellulosics, which are our three biggest fiber groups. And also I'm leading from Bestseller side this project, Mass Balance with Fashion for Good.
Hi everyone, Richard Platt from ERM. We're the world's largest sustainability-focused consultancy. The team that I help lead focuses on the scale-up of renewable and recycled chemicals and materials, and also decarbonisation of the supply chain. So we work with technology developers, helping them scale up. We work with brands who have a problem around either emissions or recycling targets that they want to try and address. We work with investors, helping them look at either companies or projects and consider those. And we work with governments, thinking about the policies that are needed to be put in place to help accelerate the scale-up of the solutions.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm the Recycled Engagement Manager at Textile Exchange. Textile Exchange is a global non-profit organisation. We're most known for setting a number of sustainability standards within the textile industry, and also produce a number of tools and research really for the textile industry to be able to support sourcing at the raw material production level and to reduce impact at that stage of the supply chain. In my role, I work very closely, mainly at the recycled level with recyclers to inform our tools, standards and resources, but also within the bio-based space, which we're here to talk about today, where we run a biosynthetics roundtable and do research around different preferred production systems and bio-based as part of that.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. To get started, I'd like to ground us in the challenge itself, because before we talk about solutions, I think it's important to understand the challenge that we're tackling and what has historically prevented adoption. So my first question is to Anders from Bestseller. As a brand, what are Bestseller's motivations to join the Mass Balance Demonstrator project?
Yeah, so for the last 5 years, we have had a lot of focus on T2T, chemical recycling in the innovation space. And I think in general, when I look at other brands, that has been a big focus because of the textile waste problem. But we also want to tap into other sources of polyester, namely bio-based PET. So for us, this is the first step we take in bio-PET. So this was a great opportunity for us to get some learnings on the quality, on the LCA, and not least mass balance, which we talked about earlier today. It's quite complicated for us internally as well. So it's important for us to get some learnings here to hopefully make that a stepping stone to scale bio-PET or T2T and other materials in general.
Thank you, Andres. I think you've highlighted that it's important as a brand to understand a lot of proof points before you go with any initiative, specifically in the bio-based space. That naturally brings us to the manufacturing side of the question. Claire, representing Indorama, but what is Indorama Ventures' current strategy regarding biosynthetic materials? And what share of your current and future production does Indorama aim to source from bio-based inputs? And what are the biggest operational constraints in reaching those targets?
It's a lot of questions.
Yes, I can definitely reiterate.
I will address one by one. Okay, so I can tell by today that the share of the bio-based material and bio-based feedstock in the portfolio of Indorama Venture is still small, okay? But if we look at what we communicated last year in terms of production, we produced around 30,000 tons of bio-PET material containing 30% of bio content. With the market intelligence that we have on the bio-based market for PET, we believe that we are one of the largest actors by volume today. We have good hope that the market is tightening, is developing, because we see more and more brands committing to bio content targets. So we believe that the market will further evolve. But as you rightly say, there are some constraints currently that we are facing to unlock those volumes and to grow the 30 KT into something more meaningful for Indorama Ventures. As a reminder, Indorama Venture produces more or less 15 million tons of product on a yearly basis, and we have 30,000 tons of bio-based material we produced last year. I would say that operationally, the feasibility is okay. Our production assets are ready for packaging, for textile. It's not a problem of technology either, because the technology is mature. Mass balance works very well with small volume. I would say the bottleneck is maybe the nature of our industry. The textile industry is a very complex and fragmented industry. So what does this mean? This means when you launch a new product on the market, you end up with a lot of different specifications for your fibers and for your yarns, and with small trials. This doesn't help, of course, to lower the premium we have on, for instance, the biofeedstock or the operational costs. So I would say that the first constraint is more of a constraint of having larger volume, and a more stable offtake demand would help lower the premium. The second one, if we look at the glycol, the bioglycol, the bioMEG production, we see very good signs. So first of all, we see investments being made. Our colleagues from UPM will soon bring 90 KT of bioMEG on the market. We see announcement from Sustainia saying that there will be in the US 170 KT of bioMEG in the future. We see brands committing to the bio content target. Now, the third point, so that is a good news for the bioMEG, but still need to come. And then the third point will be on the bio-PTA. It's a more complex one, because typically this will come from used cooked oil. As you know, there is a tremendous amount of collected used cooked oil worldwide, maybe 10, 15 million tons per year. But this is almost fully dedicated to SAF and to renewable fuels. There is a little part, derivative, the byproduct, the bio-naphtha, that can be converted in biopeaks and bio-PTA and directed towards the chemical industry. But that's a small fraction, so we need to see further investment. And the last constraint I see, it's on the harmonization of the claims and the standards that is still a bit in the way to have a full penetration, I would say, of the bio-based PET in the textile value chain. So overall, one, the assets for production, for spinning are ready. Two, the technology is mature. Three, we see that there is an increasing amount of brands communicating their bio-content target, but we need more investment on the upstream capacity feedstock part and harmonization of the standards.
Thank you, Claire. It's encouraging to hear that bio-based solution, or the demand for bio-based solutions are increasing, but you've touched on investment and scale ultimately depends on how companies can account for and communicate the benefits of these materials, which leads us into an important topic about carbon accounting. This question is for Richard, but across different stakeholders, we learned that one major challenge is a lack of consistency across mass balance approaches and how these are recognized by carbon accounting frameworks. As a partner at ERM, could you share, one, how does this uncertainty affect decision-making? And two, your view on if alignment is possible and any updates to the carbon accounting frameworks that the audience should be aware of that may influence decision-making down the line?
Yeah, so of course, uncertainty always results in less decisions being made at a slower pace. And what we're seeing in mass balance across different industries is, one, different levels of acceptance to mass balance, either no acceptance, which in some parts of the construction industry is happening because environmental product declarations mean they prevent the use of mass balance. And then in other industries, a disagreement either between the industries or even between actors within those industries on what type of mass balance approach will be accepted. And this often looks at how you allocate, say, in this case, the biomaterial that comes into a facility to the products that come out, the different ways you can do that, and also how what the breadth of allocation could be. Is it a single site or multiple sites? And we also see sometimes blurring between true mass balance approaches and a wider book and claim approaches that take environmental credentials from one place and through a book and claim system to another. Sometimes there is a blurring of those definitions. So that's one thing. There's a sort of disagreement between industries and between actors. And then the other part to your question about carbon frameworks and reporting frameworks is that they are not yet clear on what they will and will not accept. So the GHG protocol is expected to come out with some more clarity, but not until 27, 28. So there's time to wait. The SBTI, there is an expected update to the corporate net zero standard coming in hopefully a few weeks. Now that may give us some clarity. And then there are other discussions and work going on at ISO level between on chain of custody, including mass balance, and on LCA. There is some clarity from ISCC, and that's obviously a very important standard for and verification for bio-based materials on the product side. But they are also working on some alignment between the ISCC Plus and their carbon footprinting rules as well. So that you see there's a lot of different movement happening both across industry and across the different organizations. I think the positive thing is that things are happening. There's a lot of discussion on this. There's a lot of focus from different organizations across industries. But of course, it will take time. And the more alignment that can happen, the more uncertainty that can be reduced. And if there's an alignment for across things, it will make it clear to those producers who are focused on mass balance approaches and those developers who are developing segregated approaches about where they're targeting and what they need to produce.
Thank you, Richard. So if companies are navigating multiple frameworks and evolving guidance, I'd say then standards and industry alignment becomes quite pertinent. Sophie, Textile Exchange, sits at the center of many of these industry standards. For those of you in the audience, Textile Exchange is one of the leading multi-stakeholder organizations in the apparel industry, working to drive industry-wide progress on preferred materials, standards, and supply chain transformation. Sophie, could you please share Textile Exchange's current stance on mass balance and what Textile Exchange specifically hopes to gain from the project?
Yeah, great. So our Textile Exchange standards are basically two interconnected pieces. On one hand, we have the raw material level standards, which looks at the environmental and social criteria right at the beginning of the supply chain. But then we also have the chain of custody standard, which is our content claim standard, that really tracks how that certified material moves throughout the supply chain through to the final product. Mass balance at the moment is something that we recognize through our VR2 policy, which is the alternative volume reconciliation model. So that does allow for mass balance, but it doesn't allow for on-product claims. And that's just because we can't immediately say that the material includes that recycled content specifically because of the mass balance system which is in place. The rest of our model and the content claim standard focuses primarily on a batch segregation style model. We are, though, looking to learn and understand from industry. At the moment, we're very neutral. We're not leaning one way or another, but we are about to kick off our content claim standard revision period actually this month, and that will follow a 1 to 2 year process to develop that. So we're really open to listen and learn from the industry and from others to understand what are the industry needs, what are the barriers, and what is it that the industry would like in terms of these systems going forwards. For example, is there a need for on-product claims, and what does that look like? So we're really participating in this project, and it really came at a good time for us because we could understand exactly and get direct insights that will feed into that revision process. So in terms of like what that would look like, we'll be kicking that off this month, and we're going to be establishing an international working group in case that's of interest and you would want to apply for that. Then towards the end of this year in Q4, we'll have more public open consultation where feedback and insights can be submitted into the process with the intention that we'll have a finalized content claim standard ready by the end of 2027.
Thank you, Sophie. So far, we've explored the barriers, but this project was not to just solve or look at the problems, but really to discuss the solutions through collaboration. It's also about physically producing the biomass attributed materials, quantifying the climate impact, and creating a blueprint for scale, which leads to my next question for Indorama as the resin manufacturer in this project. But from your point of view, what has this project demonstrated about the practical implementation of mass balance attribution within existing PET systems?
So I can confirm again that our spinning assets, they are ready for production. They are already producing. The technology is mature, so it's not really a problem of technology and production assets. I think that we see through the project that there is a good interest from the brands in the textile value chain. You see Bestseller today, but Bestseller is also backed up in the project by other major brands, right, Anders? So we want to see this in practice, but what is still a bit in the way, it's the harmonization of the standards, it's the traceability, it's have a good, robust and solid documentation. We won't be able, in our spinning assets from an Indorama Venture point of view, to produce in a segregated manner for the textile industry, at least not under the conditions today. I give you an example. The value chain is so fragmented, there are so many actors that when we speak about one trial, we speak about 1 to 10 tons trial. But our assets, our spinning assets, they produce 1,000 tons per day. So we speak about 5 to 10 minutes of production, really. When we discuss with the packaging sector, a trial is 500 tons to 1,000 tons. So you see that it's a very complex textile supply chain.
Thank you, Claire. My next question is to Sophie, but from an ecosystem perspective, there is a range of approaches being explored to support the transition to more sustainable materials. What role do standard setters like Textile Exchange play in enabling transparency and informed decision-making, which were issues that Claire had just mentioned?
Yeah, so we have standards in place and they really lay the foundation for those credible claims. And then we have chain of custody models in place, which really connects back those on-product labels through to where the materials was produced in the first place. So this really enables transparency within the supply chain. So you as a brand or another part of the supply chain can, certify and say that the material you have purchased is recycled or bio-based or whichever materials you're using within your supply chain. Then when we look at different chain of custody models, there are a number of different models and they all have different roles and purposes they fill depending on the industry. And similarly to what Claire mentioned earlier, the textile supply chain is really complex and having these standards and certifications in place does create that common language and that common terminology to really help make the decision process a bit easier as we measure progress towards the goals that we're setting as an industry and the materials that we're using as an industry as well in the part of that process. Linking them back, I guess, to the connection to bio-based materials and mass balance. As mentioned, we are developing and revising our content claim standard at the moment. And currently we don't actually have any standards specifically for bio-based materials. But as we move forward, we are designing our system to be interoperable. And what that means is with our future materials matter standard, which will become effective at the end of this year, we're looking at how we can combine our chain of custody standards, that content claim standard and associated VR2 policy to other existing material standards. So for example, a bio-based material standard could combine their Tier 4 raw material criteria alongside and pair that with the chain of custody standard. So we're designing and thinking very future-facing here to make sure that those systems are interoperable if we hear from the industry that there is demand as well to bring through those bio-based materials and make sure that we're really leading with like an evidence-based approach. We are an ICL compliant organization, so that does include listening to feedback. And initially when we did set up that VR2 policy in the first place a few years ago, that was in response to the industry coming to us with an ask, with a need and then exploring what that would look like in practice. So I think all to say, if the demand is there and there is an interest, that is something that we're open to learn and understand and engage through this process.
Thank you, Sophie. My next question is to Richard, but besides the lack of consistent carbon accounting frameworks, how should industry and policy pivot to tackle incorporating biosynthetics, specifically for the textile industry?
Thanks. The number one barrier to scaling bio-based materials is always mentioned as cost, is higher than the willingness to pay and to get to scale. So I think that's true across, synthetics into textiles, but into many customers. There needs to be a way of closing that gap between the higher costs that are initially there often and the lack of willingness to pay. And policy is a key area to try and do that. And so we see, I know this has been mentioned many times, we see this in the fuels industry where there is a clear policy, overarching policy to drive renewable fuels, especially in Europe and California, that is doing that to an extent. But it causes, that kind of thing is potentially needed for the chemicals and materials industries and those the customers they serve. And also it will reduce the lack of level playing field that creates. I think you mentioned earlier about the used cooking oil being driven into the fuels industry, and that's because of that policy being there. So I think that's one part. And then there is also the issue that many customers would like a small volume of biomaterials and recycled materials. And that creates a problem for people who are trying to serve those industries because they have many, many customers asking for small amounts. That's difficult to serve. So I think there's also a role for market mechanisms to help form markets that help aggregate that demand and create clear demand signals on volume, on price, and on quality and specifications so that the suppliers know what they're trying to do and it reduces the barriers for them to scale up.
Thank you, Richard. So I think an important takeaway from that is that there's a lot of value from learning other sectors that are further ahead in their journey. But ultimately, any scaling pathway still depends on whether brands see sufficient value and confidence to adopt these solutions since they are the end customers. So my next question is to Anders, but what specific data or market signals would bestseller need to begin implementing biomass attributed materials more broadly?
Yeah, as a start, it would be nice to have customers asking for more expensive, more sustainable materials. That's not happening. We don't get that ask. So for us, mass balance is one lever we see as a possible way to tackle the cost issue, the cost gap that you were talking about. Because in Bestseller we are, and with many other fashion brands, we are very cost sensitive. So $1 can mean a lot in our calculations. So the mass balance is really important for us. And also I think internally in the sourcing strategy, we have a big task at Bestseller. So I mentioned earlier, we are 20 brands in-house, meaning we are not consolidated in our purchase, believe it or not. We are 20 brands actually competing in-house with each other. And also when you're working at this raw material level, you need consolidation. You also need visibility to your tier levels at tier 4, at the spinner level, like Indorama, to be able to take these strategic sourcing decisions. And that's really something we internally are very focused on, because this also goes into the T2T, the viscose production, all new materials that we are trying to implement. You really need to understand what you're actually buying. And as a reminder, we are a trading company. We are not producing anything. We don't own a single sewing machine. There's a long way from Indorama and then to us. There are many, many steps. So going back to also mass balance, as an implementation in a brand, I think there is a lot of pre-work that needs to happen in the brand as well.
Thank you, Anders. You briefly touched upon price in the very beginning, so my next question is to Claire, but what needs to happen upstream to unlock larger volumes and better economics?
Yes. I think that what is very important, and we touched base in the very beginning, is to have more investment in the upstream part, so on the feedstock. So what we do see today when the monomers are being produced, the biomonomers, we have a few suppliers. And they are very region specific because they are close to the feedstock. So that I see it as an issue because we see that very often in the textile industry, the brands have commitment on certain source of feedstock. So they will allow or not a starch coming from corn feedstock or not. They will allow or not use cooking oil. They will allow or not vegetable oil. So it's a bit of a la carte, if I may say, menu, and very difficult to manage from a supplier point of view, from the point of view of Indorama Venture, because it means that towards the colleagues we have upstream, the suppliers of the biofeedstock, we have less room of maneuver to negotiate interesting prices. So the premiums remain because we always negotiate small feedstock to satisfy all the fragmentation in the supply chain. So if we could leave, in fact, the supplier Indorama Venture to recommend the best feedstock for the customer based on their supply chain to lower the carbon footprint and have better economic, this would be very good. That's one of the ways that I do see to lower the premium. I hope it helps.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to close out this session by asking each of you to look ahead, but if you could identify one action that the industry must take in the next 2 to 3 years to drive wider uptake of biomass attribute materials, what would it be? Really quickly. Claire?
Start. Harmonization of the standard and regulation.
The policy framework, because we don't expect the pull from the end consumer.
Clear and aligned demand signals.
And agreed on the demand signals from the industry.
Well, thank you all. I know we're already at time. I see Leo right next to me, but thank you to our panelists, and thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, please find our panelists at the end of the session.